It was 3 a.m. when my world crumbled. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it would wake the entire house as I stood frozen by the ajar door of Robert's and Sarah's bedroom. The words I'd just overheard pierced me like icy daggers. Stay with this story until the very last moment. The ending will astonish you. We're having her committed tomorrow. We already signed the papers. My son-in-law's voice sounded casual, as if he were discussing the weather, while I felt the floor open up beneath my feet. For 70 years, I'd faced loss, betrayal, and pain, but I never imagined my own daughter would be the one to plunge the deepest knife. In that moment, with trembling legs and a dry mouth, I knew I had to escape. I couldn't allow them to take me away like some old, useless object. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a second, and decided that tonight my life would change forever. I didn't cry. I just crept back to my room and began planning my escape. But let me tell you how I got there. If you're watching this video, please subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. 6 months earlier, when my dear husband passed away after 45 years of marriage, Sarah insisted I move in with her and Robert. "Mom, you can't stay alone in that huge house," she'd say with that smile I now recognize as fake. "You'll have company here. We can take better care of you." Her words sounded sweet, full of filial concern, and I, devastated by the loss and feeling terribly lonely, accepted without much thought. I sold some furniture, packed my most precious memories into boxes, and moved into their modern home in the city's suburbs. The house was lovely, with white walls, a manicured lawn, and a gleaming kitchen that smelled of expensive cleaning products. But from the first day, something felt off. Robert greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and when I hugged my 16-year-old granddaughter, Chloe, I noticed she avoided my gaze. The first few days passed in a seemingly normal routine. Sarah had set up the guest room for me with cream-colored curtains and a comfortable bed. We ate breakfast together every morning, coffee, buttered toast, and Robert reading the news on his phone while Chloe got ready for school. I tried to participate in the conversations, asking about Robert's and work at the insurance company or Chloe's favorite subjects, but there were strange silences, quick glances exchanged between Robert and Sarah when they thought I wasn't watching. The house had a tense atmosphere, as if everyone was performing in a poorly rehearsed play. Sarah cooked my favorite meals, but when I offered to help, she always said, "No, Mom, you just rest. We've got it." Robert would bring flowers on Fridays and ask if I needed anything from the pharmacy, but his gestures felt mechanical, devoid of real warmth. It was during the third week that I began to notice the signs I should have seen all along. Robert had started organizing my medication into a weekly pill box. "That way you won't forget to take them, Grandma Rose," he'd say with that condescending voice you use for small children. When I protested, saying I'd always managed my medications perfectly, and Sarah intervened. "Mom, it's for your own good. Sometimes older people get confused with the doses." The word older echoed in my head like an alarm bell. I also noticed once Robert had started reviewing my mail before giving it to me. "I'm just making sure it's not annoying junk mail," he'd explain. But I saw how his eyes scanned every envelope carefully. My bank statements arrived already opened, and when I asked, Sarah said it was a mail carrier error, but I knew something was wrong. My womanly instincts, having raised 5 children and survived decades of marriage, screamed at me that I was being manipulated. The final straw came when I discovered Robert had changed the house's Wi-Fi password. When I tried to connect my phone to video call my old friends, I couldn't access it. "The router is broken, Mom." Sarah lied without even looking me in the eye. "Robert will fix it this weekend." But the weekend passed, and another, and I still couldn't use the internet. I began to feel like a prisoner in the house that was supposed to be my refuge. My friends stopped calling because I wasn't answering their messages, and when I asked to use the house phone, there was always an excuse. "The line's busy," or "better after dinner, we don't want to bother the neighbors." Slowly, I realized they were isolating me from the outside world, cutting my connections one by one like cutting the strings of a marionette. I truly wonder if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to be quiet to maintain peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion because every story is like a candle that can light the way for someone else. That night, that changed everything started like any other. We had eaten roasted chicken with vegetables, and Robert had been particularly attentive, pouring my water and asking if the food was to my liking. Chloe Ann had talked about a school history project, and for a moment, the table felt like a real home. But I had already learned to read the silent glances between Robert and Hyan and Sarah, those quick exchanges that spoke a language I didn't understand. After dinner, I retired to my room early, pretending to be tired. In reality, I had started listening. Over the past few weeks, I had noticed that the family's important conversations happened after I went to bed, as if my presence was an obstacle to their true discussions. From my bed, I could hear fragments of conversation drifting in from the living room. Jens. Robert Yan was on the phone with someone, but his voice was too low to distinguish the words. I got up silently and walked to my door. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the light seeping in from the main living area. I could hear better as I got closer, walking barefoot on the cold tile floor. Robert was on the sofa with his back to me, the phone pressed to his ear. His voice sounded relaxed, even satisfied. No, Eleanor, everything is ready. We'll go early tomorrow. We've already signed all the necessary papers. I felt as if I'd been punched in the stomach. Papers. What papers? My mind raced, trying to understand what he was talking about. Robert's voice continued, clearer now because he had leaned back on the sofa and was talking towards the ceiling. The place is perfect. Mom has gardens, 24-hour nurses, and it's only 30 minutes from here. Sarah can visit her on weekends if she wants to. And then my heart stopped. He was talking about me. He was talking about committing me somewhere. Yes, I already spoke with Dr. Miller. He signed the medical documents we needed. He says at her age, it's normal to require specialized care. The words hit me one after another like hammer blows. Miller was my primary care physician, a man I had trusted for years. How could he have signed something without consulting me? My legs began to tremble, but I couldn't move. I needed to hear more. Don't worry about the money, Eleanor. With her pension and the savings she has, we can cover the household expenses for years. Plus, I already looked into selling her old house. The old house. My house. The house where I'd lived for 30 years, where I'd raised my children, where my husband had died in my arms. Robert was talking about selling it as if it were his own, as if I were already dead. Eleanor, please don't lecture me. You know this is what's best for everyone. She can't take care of herself anymore, and we can't give her the care she deserves. A lie. I could cook, clean, manage my medication, and I had been doing it perfectly until I arrived at this house. The only reason I seemed confused was because they controlled every aspect of my life. Robert continued talking to his mother, Eleanor, revealing details that chilled my blood. Sarah was worried at first, but I explained to her that it's the only way to secure and Chloe's future. College costs more than 50,000 a year, and with the Rose's pension, we can pay for it without any problems. Besides, if we sell the house, we'll have enough for the down payment on a bigger house for us. There was the truth, and naked and cruel. They didn't want to commit me because I was sick, or because they couldn't care for me. They wanted me out of the way so they could seize my money and my property. My own daughter had signed papers to get rid of me, like a piece of old furniture cluttering the living room. The transport from the retirement home is coming tomorrow at 8 a.m. We told her it was for a medical evaluation, so she won't suspect anything until it's too late. Robert, he laughed, a cold, stomach-churning laugh. By the time she figures out what's happening, she'll be registered as a permanent resident. The doctor says that with her age and emotional state after her husband's death, it's easy to justify the commitment. Every word was a slap. They had planned every detail of my legal kidnapping with the precision of experienced criminals. And the most painful part of all was that my own daughter, the child I had carried in my womb, whom I had taught to walk and consoled during her nightmares, was an accomplice in this betrayal. Yes, Mama. Sarah already packed all her important things into boxes. Tomorrow after they take her, we'll change the locks and start clearing out the room. The room that was my room, my family photos, my books, the blanket my mother had knitted, everything would be packed up and discarded like trash. No, I don't think Chloe will be a problem. She's a teenager. She's more worried about her friends than her grandmother. Plus, we told her the retirement home has a pool and recreational activities, and that her grandmother will be better off there. But I knew Chloe loved me. I had seen pain in her eyes these last few weeks, as if she sensed something bad was happening, but didn't know what. Tell me whether you have parents, grandparents, or older family members who deserve more respect than they currently receive from their families. Alternatively, tell me if you yourself are going through a situation in which you're not appreciated as much as you truly deserve. Finally, Bess, Robert Schitz said goodbye to his mother. Perfect, Mom. By this time tomorrow, it will all be over. Rose will be in her new home, and we can start living our lives without this burden. That word, burden, rang in my ears like a scream. I had been called many things in my life, wife, mother, teacher, friend, but never a burden. Robert hung up the phone and headed toward the kitchen. I raced back to my room as silently as I could, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard throughout the house. I sat on the bed, trembling, trying to process what I had just discovered. In less than 5 hours, a transport would come to take me to a place where I would be locked up against my will, while my own family seized everything I had worked for during 70 years of life. I sat on the bed for several minutes, my mind racing a mile a minute, while my heart slowly returned to its normal rhythm. The bedside clock read 3:15 a.m. I had less than 5 hours before that transport arrived. 5 hours to decide whether I would remain a helpless victim or take control of my destiny. The Rose, who had raised 5 children while working as a teacher, who had cared for her sick husband for 2 years without ever complaining, who had faced poverty and hardship with her chin held high, that woman wouldn't surrender without a fight. I got out of bed with a determination I hadn't felt in months. The first thing I did was mentally review everything I had heard. Chabert had mentioned that they had already signed papers, that Dr. Genesis Miller had provided medical documents, and that a transport would arrive at 8 a.m. tomorrow. They had also packed my belongings, which meant they didn't expect me to ever return. But there was one thing they hadn't considered. I was still the owner of my bank account, my house, and all my assets. As long as I had my ID and my mind was clear, I had legal power. The problem was that once I was locked up in that retirement home, it would be much harder to prove my mental competence. I walked to my dresser and pulled out a small suitcase I had kept at the back of the closet. With trembling but determined hands, I began to pack only the essentials: underwear, 2 changes of clothes, my medication, my most important documents, which I kept in a folder, and the 500 yen in cash I always kept for emergencies. I also took the jewelry my husband had given me during our marriage: my wedding ring, the pearl earrings he gave me on our 20th anniversary, and the gold necklace that had belonged to my mother. Those pieces had sentimental and economic value and could be useful if I needed money. While I packed, my mind worked on a plan. I couldn't leave through the front door because there was an alarm that was activated at night. Robert had explained on the first day that it was for security, but now I understood it was another form of control. However, my bedroom window overlooked the side yard, and I remembered that when I arrived, I had noticed the latch was a little loose. It was a low window, less than 3 feet from the ground, perfectly manageable for a woman my age who was still in good physical shape. The question was, where to go once I got out? I remembered my old neighbor, Mrs. Davis, who lived about 10 blocks from Sarah's house. She and I had been friends for years, and I knew she was discreet and reliable. Her house was close enough to walk to, but far enough that Robert and Sarah wouldn't immediately think to look for me there. Mrs. Davison had always told me her door was open to me no matter the hour. I hoped that promise still held true. At 4 a.m., I finished packing and got dressed in comfortable clothes: dark pants, a long-sleeve shirt, and my quietest shoes. I double-checked that I had all my documents: ID, credit cards, savings book, and a piece of paper where I had written down important phone numbers, including that of my lawyer, Oscar Peterson, who had handled my husband's and my legal affairs for years. Oscar was an honest and competent man, and if anyone could help me protect my rights, it was him. Before opening the window, I cautiously peered out to check the yard. The house was completely silent and the neighbors' lights were off. The moon provided enough light to see the path to the side gate that led to the street. Robert had once mentioned that they never locked that gate because they only used it to take out the trash. With luck, I could slip through there without making a sound. I opened the window slowly, inch by inch, praying it wouldn't creak. The latch was indeed loose, and the window slid open smoothly. The cool morning air hit my face, bringing with it the scent of the jasmine Sarah had planted near the window. How ironic that the flowers my daughter had chosen to beautify her home would witness my escape from her betrayal. I placed the suitcase on the garden ground and then slid out the window with more agility than I had had in years. Adrenaline coursed through my veins like a flooding river. Once outside, I picked up my suitcase and walked close to the side of the house, avoiding the areas with gravel that might crunch under my feet. The garden was well kept, with soft grass that muffled the sound of my steps. I reached the side gate, and it was indeed unlocked. I pushed it open just enough to pass through, and in seconds I was on the street. The street was deserted and silent, illuminated only by the streetlights that cast circles of yellowish light every 50 yards. I began to walk with a firm but not too fast pace, so as not to attract attention if anyone saw me from a window. As I walked, I felt a strange mix of fear and liberation. For the first time in months, I was making my own decisions, walking where I wanted to go, with no one telling me what to do or what not to do. The route to Mrs. Davis's house was familiar to me because we had walked it together many times when she came to visit me or when I went to have tea at her place. 10 blocks didn't seem like much in a car, but on foot, carrying a suitcase, and at 70 years old, it felt like a marathon. However, every step I took moved me further away from the nightmare that had been my life at once Sarah's house and closer to the possibility of regaining my freedom. When I reached the 5th block, I had to stop for a moment to rest. I sat on the edge of a public planter trying to catch my breath. It was then that the reality of what I was doing fully hit me. A 70-year-old woman escaping in the middle of the night from her own daughter's house because she had uncovered a plot to commit her against her will. If someone had told me this story a year ago, I wouldn't have believed it, but there I was, living the nightmare that had become my reality. I arrived at Mrs. Davis's house when the clock on the nearby church tower struck 4:30 a.m. Her windows were dark, as expected at that hour, but there was a small light on the porch that she always left on at night. I stood in front of her door for several seconds, hesitating about whether it was right to wake my friend at this hour with a story that sounded straight out of a novel. But when I remembered Robert's words about the transport coming in less than 4 hours, I knew I had no alternative. I knocked softly, 3 short taps. I waited a moment and knocked again. I heard shuffling footsteps from inside and Aunt Mrs. Davis's sleepy voice asking, "Who is it?" "It's me, Betty." "Rose," I replied in a low but clear voice. There was a silence, followed by the sound of several bolts sliding open. The door opened, revealing Mrs. Davis in a robe, with messy hair and eyes swollen from sleep, but her expression immediately changed from confusion to concern when she saw me standing there with my suitcase. "My God, Rose, what happened? Are you okay?" she asked, quickly pulling me inside and closing the door behind me. I collapsed onto her sofa, and for the first time all night, tears began to flow. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief and a rage I had been suppressing for months. Mrs. Davis sat beside me, put her arm around my shoulders, and let me cry without asking questions. When I could finally speak, I told her everything. The conversation I had overheard, the plan to commit me, the manipulation with my medication, the isolation, and the betrayal by my own daughter. Mrs. Davis listened in silence, but I saw her expression harden with every detail I revealed. "Those jerks," she muttered when I finished my story. "I always knew I didn't like that Robert. He had something in his eyes that didn't inspire trust." Mrs. Davis had met Robert several times when she visited my old house, and I remembered she once commented that he seemed too interested in the details of my finances. "And Sarah Rose, I thought that girl loved you. How could she do this?" The disappointment in her voice mirrored my own pain. Sarah there had been an exemplary daughter for years, but now I understood that maybe she had just been waiting for the right moment to show her true nature. Mrs. Davis made me chamomile tea and offered me her guest room. You can stay here as long as you need, she said firmly. But you have to call a lawyer immediately. What they are doing is kidnapping and fraud. There are laws that protect older people from this kind of abuse. She was right. I knew Oscar Peterson was my best option, but I would have to wait until his office opened to contact him. Meanwhile, I needed to think about all the steps I needed to take to protect myself. When the first lights of dawn began to filter through Mrs. Davis's windows, I had already slept for a couple of hours and had a clear plan in mind. First, I would call named Oscars to tell him the situation and ask him to take immediate legal action. Second, I would go to the bank to ensure no one else could access my accounts. Third, I would contact Dr. Miller to confront him about the documents he had signed without my knowledge. And fourth, I needed to gather evidence of everything that had happened at Sarah's kid's house. At 7 a.m., Mrs. Davis and I were having breakfast when her phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something told me it was related to me. Should I answer? Mrs. Davis asked me. I nodded, curious to know who might be calling. Mrs. Davis answered with a simple, hello, and then handed me the phone. It's for you, she said with a strange expression. It was Chloe, my granddaughter, and her voice sounded distressed and confused. Grandma, where are you? Dad and Mom are frantic. They say you disappeared during the night and that you're sick and confused. Some people from an ambulance came to take you to the doctor, but when they went to your room, you weren't there. My heart raced, and Robert and Sarah had discovered my escape and were already executing their contingency plan, painting me as a confused old woman who had wandered off lost during the night. And Chloe said, my love, listen to me very carefully, I said with the calmest voice I could manage. I'm not sick or confused. I'm perfectly fine and in a safe place, but I need you to know something very important about your parents. Chloe fell silent, and I could hear voices in the background. Lily then started arguing about what to do. I can't talk much now, but you will understand everything soon. The only thing you need to know is that I love you. You will always be my favorite granddaughter, and none of what you're going to hear about me in the coming days is true. And Grandma, I don't understand anything. Dad says you got up sleepwalking last night and left the house without remembering where you were going. He says it's normal for people your age, and that's why you need specialized medical attention. Chloe's voice cracked, and I could hear the fear and confusion in her words. Robert had already begun to manipulate her, using the sleepwalking story to explain my absence and justify the need to commit me. Chloe, do you remember when you were little and we played detectives? I'm going to ask you to use those skills now. Observe everything your parents say and do. See if their stories make sense. And above all, remember that your grandmother, who taught you to read, who took you to the park every Sunday, who knows your birthday, your favorite color, and all your secrets, is not sick. Chloe sobbed on the other end of the line. I have to hang up, Grandma. Dad is coming over here. The line went dead, leaving me with a broken heart, but also with a new determination. It was official. The war had begun. Robert and wouldn't just try to commit me when they found me. They were also building a narrative where I was a senile old woman who was a danger to myself. But they had a weakness they hadn't considered. Chloe, my granddaughter, she was intelligent and sensitive, and even though she was only 16, she had inherited my ability to see beyond the pretty lies. If I could maintain a line of communication with her, I would have an ally inside enemy territory. At 8:30 a.m., I was sitting in Oscar Peterson's office. He had agreed to see me on an emergency basis after I explained the situation by phone. Oscar was a 60-year-old man with gray hair and a penetrating gaze that inspired confidence. He had managed my family's legal affairs for 15 years and knew my financial and mental situation perfectly. When I finished telling him everything that had happened, he leaned back in his chair with an expression of indignation that reassured me. It wasn't the first time he had seen a case like mine. Rose, what they are doing constitutes several crimes, he said, taking notes in a legal pad. First, conspiracy to deprive you of your liberty. Second, attempted fraud to seize your assets. Third, falsification of medical documents. If Dr. Kissam Miller indeed signed something without examining you. And fourth, elder abuse, which carries very severe penalties in this state. His words gave me hope, but also made me understand the gravity of what I was facing. The first thing we're going to do is get a temporary protective order that prevents them from committing you without your consent. Second, we're going to freeze all your bank accounts so no one else can access them. And third, we are going to document all of this officially. Oscar Tienin immediately called his assistant to prepare the necessary documents and then contacted a judge he knew to request an emergency hearing. The legal system has specific protections for older people in situations like yours, he explained while we waited. But we need to act fast before they present their own version of events. He asked me to write a detailed statement of everything that had happened, including dates, specific conversations, and any evidence I could recall. While I was writing my statement, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I decided to answer. The voice I heard chilled my blood. It was Count Robert, but he sounded completely different from the man who had been acting like the perfect son-in-law for months. His voice was cold, threatening, with no trace of the false courtesy he had used with me. Rose, I know you're there. You need to return home immediately. You have serious health problems and need medical attention. If you don't come back voluntarily, we're going to have to take more drastic measures. And Robert, I replied with a calm I didn't feel. I'm perfectly fine, and I have no intention of returning to that house. Furthermore, I now know exactly what your plans for me were. There was silence on the other end of the line, and then Robert changed tactics. I don't know what you're talking about, Rose. You got up confused last night and left the house. We've been looking for you all night. Sarah is hysterical with worry. How could you do this to your own daughter? The manipulation in his voice was so obvious it almost made me laugh. I overheard your conversation with your mother last night, eh? Robert, I know all about the retirement home, about the papers you signed, about selling my house, about using my pension to pay for Sarah and Chloe's to college. I know Dr. Dastich Miller signed false documents. I know everything. This time the silence was longer, and when Quiet Robert spoke again, he had completely abandoned the pretense of concern. Listen to me carefully, you stupid old woman. You are going to come back to this house right now, or you will regret it. We have ways to make you look mentally incompetent, and when we're finished with you, no one is going to believe a word you say. Oscar, who had been listening to the conversation, gestured for me to put him on speakerphone. Robert was Oscar Peterson. Here, counsel for the Mrs. Rose Morales. Oscar intervened with a professional voice. This conversation is being recorded, and what you just said constitutes a direct threat against my client. I suggest you consult with an attorney before making any further statements that can be used against you. Robert hung up immediately, but we had already gotten what we needed, recorded evidence of his true nature. Perfect, Oscar said, saving the recording on his phone. This demonstrates there is no real medical concern on their part. It is a clear threat to force you to return. Half an hour later, Oscar's assistant arrived with the temporary protective order documents, and we headed to the courthouse for the emergency hearing. The judge, a middle-aged woman named Wasa Judge Valdez, listened to my case carefully and reviewed the recording of Robert's threat. Mrs. Morales says, and the judge said to me after hearing all the evidence, it is evident that you are in full possession of your mental faculties and have been the victim of attempted abuse. I'm going to issue a temporary protective order that prohibits Robert Martinez, Sarah Martinez, and Eleanor Martinez from approaching you or contacting you without your consent. I will also order an official investigation into the falsified medical documents and the attempted forced commitment. The sense of relief I felt at that moment was indescribable. We left the courthouse with official documents that legally protected me, but Ian and Oscar warned me this was only the beginning. Oh, now they are going to try to prove that you are mentally incompetent to manage your affairs. They're going to bring witnesses. They're going to get biased medical evaluations. They're going to do everything possible to reverse this order. He was right. Robert and Forceratan wouldn't give up easily, especially now that they knew I was fighting back. Our next step was to go to the bank. When we arrived, we asked to speak to the manager, and I explained the situation. It turned out Robert, yes, had tried to obtain information about my accounts the week before, saying he was my son-in-law and needed to help manage my finances because I was a little confused lately. Fortunately, the bank had strict privacy policies and hadn't given him any information. However, the manager showed me that there had been attempts at online access to my account from an IP address that wasn't mine. I immediately changed all my passwords, added a security alert to all my accounts, and established that only I could authorize any transaction over $100. I also transferred the majority of my money to a new account at a different bank where Dad, Robert, and yes, Sarah wouldn't think to look. Your life savings amount to approximately $10,000, the manager explained while we processed the transfers. With your monthly pension of $10,800, you have enough resources to live independently for many years. When we left the bank, I felt as if I had regained an important part of my identity. For months, Robert had controlled my finances indirectly, suggesting expenses, reviewing my statements, making me feel like an economic burden. Now I had total control over my money again, and that gave me the power to make decisions about my future. Oscar drove me back to Mrs. Davis's house, where we had lunch and planned the next steps. Mrs. Davis had been following local news online and had found something interesting. A note in the local paper about the increase in cases of financial elder abuse. "Look at this, Rose," she said, showing me her tablet. "It says there were over 500 reported cases in our county last year. The majority involve family members trying to seize property and savings from their older relatives." As we read the article, my phone rang again. This time it was Aunt Chloe, but her voice sounded different, more cautious. "Grandma, can you talk? I'm at my friend Sophia's house." I said yes, and Chloe continued in a whisper. "Grandma, something weird is happening here. After we talked this morning, Dad and Mom have been on the phone all day. I overheard Dad talking to someone about getting a doctor to say you have Alzheimer's, and Mom packed all your things into boxes and put them in the garage." My heart raced, and Chloe was beginning to see the truth. "I also found something strange, Grandma. On Dad's desk, there are some papers with your name on them, and one says something about selling your house, but you never said you wanted to sell your house. Did you?" Chloe was connecting the dots, just as I had hoped she would. "My love," I said softly, "I need you to be very brave and very smart. Your parents are not telling the truth about me or the situation. Do you think you can take pictures of those papers without them noticing?" Chloe was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "Yes, Grandma. I think I can do it, but I'm scared." "Chloe, my brave girl," I said with all the tenderness I could convey over the phone, "I understand you're scared, but I need you to trust me as you always have. If you can get those pictures, you would help me protect not only myself, but also you. Because if your parents can do this to me, their mother, imagine what they could do to you when you turn 18 and have access to your college fund." Chloe sighed on the other end of the line, and I could hear the weight of understanding falling onto her young shoulders. "Grandma, is it true that Dad wanted to commit you to keep your money?" Her voice broke slightly as she asked the question. "Yes, my love, that is exactly what they wanted to do. Last night I overheard your dad talking on the phone with your grandmother, Eleanor, planning everything. They were going to take me to a retirement home this morning, sell my house, and use my pension to pay for your college without asking me." Chloe was silent for so long I thought she had hung up. Finally, she whispered, "But Mom always says she loves you so much. How can she be doing this?" And it was the question I myself had asked hundreds of times since last night. "Yes, sometimes the people we love can disappoint us in ways we never imagined," I replied. "Your mom maybe convinced herself this was the best thing for everyone, but that doesn't make it right. Chloe, do you remember the game we played when you were little, Nan? I would ask you what mattered most to me in the world, and you always said truth and family. Do you think that has changed? Do you think I would suddenly decide to destroy my own family with lies?" There was a long pause before her response. "No, Grandma, that doesn't make sense. But then why are Dad and Mom saying these things?" "Because they have a lot to lose if the truth comes out, my love. Robert N. could go to jail for falsifying medical documents. Your mom could lose her reputation and her job, and they would both lose access to my money, which is what they wanted from the beginning. Chloe Dan didn't reply immediately, but when she did, her message filled me with hope. Grandma, I think I need to see more evidence for myself. Can you send me the recordings you have? That night, I sent in Chloe the recordings of Robert's threats and my conversation with Eleanor. I also sent her copies of all the documents Oscar had gathered, including the bank reports that showed Robert's attempts at unauthorized access. I knew it was risky to involve Chloe so deeply, but I also knew she was a smart young woman who deserved to know the truth about her parent. At 2 a.m., I received a message that made me cry with relief. Grandma, I listened to the recordings. Dad's voice when he threatens you is the same voice he uses with me when he's really angry, not the fake voice he uses in public. And I recognize Grandma Eleanor's laugh when she says, "You've already lived your life." I know it's real. It's all real. I'm so sorry for doubting. My granddaughter had chosen the truth over comfort, and that gave me the strength I needed to continue fighting. Chloe did. You don't have to apologize. They are very good at manipulating, and it's natural that you had doubts. But now that you know the truth, I need you to be very careful. Don't let them know you believe me. Your safety is more important than anything. Chloe assured me she understood, and we agreed on a secret code for communication. She would send me photos of flowers when it was safe to talk, and photos of clouds when there was danger. The next day, Chloe sent me a photo of red roses, followed by a message that would change everything. Grandma, Dad, and Grandma Eleanor are going to do something tomorrow. I overheard Dad talking about bringing a different doctor to the house, someone who will say you have to be committed immediately for your own safety. They are also going to contact the police to report you as a missing and confused older person. You have to be prepared. The information Chloe had sent me filled me with a mixture of panic and determination. Robert and Eleanor had decided to escalate their strategy, and I knew I had less than 24 hours to prepare for their next attack. I immediately called Oscar, who set up an emergency meeting at his office first thing in the morning. What they are planning is technically legal if they get the correct court order, he explained while reviewing legal codes on his computer. But we have advantages they don't know about. Oscar had been working all night preparing a counter strategy. First, I've already hired an independent psychiatrist, Dr. Beckham Richard Green, to evaluate you this afternoon. He is a respected professional who has no connections with your family, and his evaluations are considered impartial by all state courts. He explained that this evaluation would be crucial to demonstrating my mental competence. Second, I got an emergency appointment with Judge Kentetan Valdez for tomorrow at 10 a.m. before they can present their own case. And third, Oscar continued with a smile, my private investigator found very interesting information about Dr. S. Miller. It turns out he has gambling debts of over $50,000, and Robert lent him our $10,000 2 months ago. We have the bank records proving the payment. This explained why the doctor had been willing to falsify my medical documents. Robert had bought him off, taking advantage of his financial desperation. The evaluation with Dr. Tim Green that afternoon was exhaustive but reassuring. For 3 hours, he asked me questions about my personal history, my finances, my medication, and my understanding of the current situation. He also performed standard cognitive tests, recalling lists of words, solving math problems, identifying dates and places. Named Mrs. Morales, he told me at the end, not only are you completely mentally competent, but you demonstrate a clarity and mental acuity superior to the average for any age. That night, Chloe sent me a series of messages that confirmed my worst fears but also gave me valuable information. Grandma, the new doctor arrived this afternoon. He's an older man, very serious, and Dad was showing him papers and talking in a low voice. I overheard Dad telling him you had violent episodes and had threatened the family. Robert's lies were becoming more elaborate and dangerous. Grandma Eleanor also came with a suitcase. She's going to stay here until the problem is resolved, as she says. The most disturbing part came in the next message. Grandma, I found something awful on Dad's phone. He left his phone on the table while he was showering, and I saw messages with someone named Dr. Scott. Dad wrote, I need you to declare her incompetent, no matter what she's like when you see her. The extra payment we discussed will be in your account tomorrow. The doctor replied, Understood. I have experience handling these difficult cases. And my blood ran cold. Robert had found a corrupt doctor willing to falsify a psychiatric evaluation in exchange for money. And Chloe has continued. But there's something else, Grandma. Mom is acting very strange. Last night I heard her crying in her room, and when Grandma Eleanor asked her what was wrong, Mom said she wasn't sure if this was the right thing anymore. Grandma Eleanor yelled at her and told her it was too late to back out, that they had gone too far to turn back. There was a crack in the alliance, and Sarah was beginning to question what they were doing. I spent the night at Mrs. Davis's house, preparing for what I knew would be the most important day of this battle. Oscar said, had coordinated everything perfectly. At 8 a.m., I would voluntarily present myself at the courthouse with my own psychiatric evaluation and all the evidence of the conspiracy. At 10 a.m., we would have the hearing with Judge Valdez, and before Lieutenant Robert could present his own case, we would have already exposed his lies and corruption. The morning arrived cold and gray, perfect for the drama that was about to unfold. Mrs. Davis accompanied me to the courthouse where we met Oscar and Dr. Green. Oscar said as we walked toward the entrance, Remember that today you are not only fighting for your freedom, you're fighting for your dignity, for your right to age with respect, and you are sending a message to other abusers that older people are not easy victims. When we entered the courtroom, I was surprised to see it was packed. There were journalists, representatives from elder rights organizations, and several people who had read my story and come to support me. On the opposite side, I saw 10% with his lawyer, Mr. Thomas, both dressed in black and with somber expressions. Sarah was there too, but she looked pale and nervous, avoiding my gaze. And Judge Valdez called the court to order and began reviewing all the documents we had presented. And Mr. Thomas said, she said to Ash Roberts, lawyer, I see that you allege Mrs. Morales is mentally incompetent, but she has voluntarily presented herself today with an independent psychiatric evaluation that completely contradicts your claims. How do you explain this discrepancy? Mr. Thomas stood up and began his argument. Your Honor, it is precisely the nature of certain mental conditions that patients can appear lucid temporarily, especially when they are in a controlled environment like a doctor's office. My client has evidence that Mrs. Morales has had violent and threatening episodes that demonstrate she poses a danger. It was a clever tactic, but Oscar was prepared for it. Your Honor, Oscar Yan intervened. I would like to present evidence that the doctor evaluating my client for the other party received a 5,000 ounce payment from Mr. Robert Martinez 2 days before conducting said evaluation. We also have text messages that prove Mr. Martinez specifically instructed the doctor to declare my client incompetent regardless of her actual mental state. The murmur in the room was audible when Oscar presented the screenshots Chloe had gotten. Robert's face turned red when he saw we had the messages from his phone. Mr. Thomas requested a recess to consult with his client, but Judge Valdez denied the request. I want to hear exactly how you explain these messages before proceeding. Robert urgently whispered something in his lawyer's ear, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Your Honor, as Mr. Thomas said after a moment, my client denies having sent those messages. It is possible his phone was compromised or the messages were fabricated. But Oscar had one more card to play. Your Honor, I would like to call my client's granddaughter, Chloe Martinez, to testify, who can confirm that she herself took these screenshots from her father's phone. Chloe entered the courtroom accompanied by a court social worker. She looked small and nervous, but when she looked at me, I saw determination in her eyes. Robert tried to smile at her, but Maya and Chloe avoided his gaze. Under oath, Shed and Chloe testified that she had seen the messages on Robert's phone and had taken the pictures on her own. Did someone ask you to do this? Oscar asked her. No, sir. I did it because I knew what my parents were planning to do to my grandmother was wrong. The crucial question came when Oscar had asked Chloe to describe Robert's behavior at home. Have you ever seen your grandmother be violent or threatening, as your father alleges? Chloe took a deep breath and answered in a clear voice, No, sir, my grandmother has never been violent, but I have seen my dad threaten her on the phone, and I have overheard conversations where he and my other grandmother planned things against her. Robert jumped up from his seat, shouting, She's lying, they manipulated her. But the judge ordered him to sit down and remain silent. Finally, Oscar presented the evidence of the bribe to Dr. Miller and the falsification of medical documents. Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of a confused old woman, but a case of criminal conspiracy to deprive a competent person of her freedom and seize her assets. The judge reviewed all the documents in silence for several minutes that felt like hours. I have seen enough, Judge Valdez finally declared. The evidence presented clearly demonstrates that Mrs. Rose Morales is in full possession of her mental faculties and has been the victim of a conspiracy to deprive her of her rights. I order that the protective order against Mr. Robert Martinez, Mrs. Sarah Martinez, and Mrs. Eleanor Martinez be maintained. Furthermore, I order an immediate criminal investigation into the allegations of document falsification, bribery, and conspiracy. The gavel came down, and I knew I had won the first real battle. When Judge Valdez delivered her verdict, I felt a gigantic weight lift from my shoulders. I had won, but the look Robert gave me from across the room told me this was far from over. And as we left the courthouse, I saw Mr. Thomas talking urgently with Robert, whose hands were clenched into fists and his jaw tight. Sarah remained seated in her chair, with her head in her hands, sobbing silently. Chloe approached me and hugged me tightly. Grandma, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I doubted you. I'm sorry I didn't realize what Mom and Dad were doing sooner. My precious girl, I said, stroking her hair, you have nothing to regret. You were the bravest of all of us. Without your help, I never would have been able to prove the truth. The court social worker explained to me that Chloe could stay with me temporarily while the family situation was investigated, but that eventually decisions about her custody would have to be made. For now, and he told me, the important thing is that you are both safe. Oscar accompanied me to file a police report regarding the criminal charges. The detective in charge of the case, an older man named Detective Rodriguez, listened carefully as I recounted the entire story once again. Mrs. Morales, he told me when I finished, in my 20 years of service, I've seen many cases of elder abuse, but few with as much documented evidence as yours. Mr. Robert Martinez is going to face very serious charges. He explained that Robert's could be charged with conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, document falsification, bribery, and elder abuse, charges that together could result in a sentence of up to 15 years in prison. 3 days later, Robert was arrested at his workplace. Local news covered the arrest, and the image of Robert in handcuffs leaving his insurance office went viral on social media. Dr. Miller was also arrested and immediately lost his medical license. Dr. Scott, who had accepted the bribe to falsify my psychiatric evaluation, faced similar charges and an investigation by the state medical board. Eleanor, Robert's mother, was questioned but not arrested, although she was prohibited from contacting me under any circumstances. However, I received a call from her a week after Robert's arrest. Her voice no longer held the arrogance it had before. It sounded defeated and bitter. This is your fault, Rose. You destroyed my son and my family with your selfishness. Her twisted logic astonished me even after everything that had happened. Eleanor, I replied with a calm that surprised me. Your son destroyed himself when he decided to steal and lie. I only defended myself. She muttered something about revenge before hanging up, but her empty threats no longer mattered to me. Robert was in jail awaiting trial. Etienne Miller had lost his career, and I had total control of my life again. The situation with Chestin Saradant was more complicated and painful. For the first 2 weeks after the ruling, I didn't hear from her. Chloe told me her mother had temporarily moved in with a friend because she couldn't bear to be in the house where they had planned my kidnapping. Mom cries a lot. Chloe told me one afternoon while we were having tea at Mrs. Davis's house. I think she really realizes what she did, but she doesn't know how to apologize. A month after the ruling, and Sarah showed up at Mrs. Davis's door on a rainy afternoon. She looked drawn with deep dark circles under her eyes and messy hair. Mrs. Davis asked me if I wanted to see her, and after hesitating, I decided I did. Sarah sat across from me on Mrs. Davis's sofa, and for several minutes, neither of us said anything. Finally, she broke the silence. Mom, I don't know where to start. You could start by explaining how my own daughter, the child I carried in my womb for 9 months, whom I raised with love and sacrifice, could sign papers to lock me up as if I were a dangerous animal. I get said. My voice came out harsher than I intended, but the words needed to be said. And Sarah began to cry, but I'd cried too much over the past few months to feel immediate compassion. Robert Howe convinced me it was the best thing for you, she whispered through tears. He said you were deteriorating, that it was dangerous to leave you alone, that the retirement home was like a 5-star hotel. I didn't want to hurt you, Mom. I swear I didn't. Her explanation sounded pathetic even to herself. And the money, Sarah. Did Robert also convince you that you needed my pension and my savings? Sarah covered her face with her hands. We were in financial trouble. Buran lost a lot of money in bad investments, and Chloe's college cost so much. I thought maybe you could help us, but Robert had said you would never accept voluntarily. The truth behind the entire conspiracy was finally coming out. It wasn't just malice, but also financial desperation and Robert's toxic influence, Sarah. I said after a long silence. For 70 years, I've faced money problems, family crises, illnesses, and your father's death. Never, not once, did I consider betraying my family to solve my problems. If you had come to me honestly, if you had explained the situation, we would have found a solution together, but you chose lies, manipulation, and abuse. Sarah's tears intensified. I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness. I know what we did is unforgivable, but you are my mother and I can't live without you in my life. Her words hurt me because I recognized the genuine love mixed with guilt and regret. But I also recognized that the damage caused was profound and wouldn't be easily repaired. Forgiveness, I finally told her, is not something you can ask for. It's something you earn with time, honesty, and real change. Robert is going to jail for what he did, and you are going to have to live with the consequences of your decisions. If you truly want a chance to rebuild our relationship, you're going to have to prove that you have changed, not just with words, but with actions. Chloe, then, who had been living with me since the ruling, decided to stay with me permanently. Grandma, she told me one night while studying for her final exams, I feel safe with you. I know you would never lie to me or betray me for money. Legal custody was relatively simple. As Sarah did not fight my petition, and as Chloe was already 17, which meant her opinion carried a lot of weight in the court's decision. 6 months after the ruling, Robert was sentenced to 12 years in prison after pleading guilty to all charges. Dr. Millerson received 5 years and permanently lost his medical license. During the sentencing hearing, I had the opportunity to give a victim impact statement. I looked directly at Robert as I spoke. You didn't just try to steal my money and my freedom. You tried to steal my dignity, my autonomy, and my right to age with respect. But you failed because you underestimated the strength of a woman who has lived 70 years learning to fight for what is right. With the money I recovered and the finally authorized sale of my old house, I bought a small but comfortable house near Chloe's school. It had a garden where I planted tomatoes, roses, and aromatic herbs. Every morning as I watered my plants, I reflected on how my life had changed. For months, I had lived feeling like a burden, like a problem others had to solve. Now I understood that I had always had power. I had just allowed others to make me believe otherwise. Chloe flourished in our new home. Her grades improved, she regained her smile, and she began talking about her dreams of studying law to help other people like her grandmother. We established a pleasant routine. We ate breakfast together before she went to school. I worked in my garden or read while she studied, and in the evenings we cooked and talked about our days. Sarah began visiting once a week, always asking permission first and respecting any limits I set. Slowly, very slowly, we began to rebuild something resembling a relationship. She had started therapy to understand how she had allowed Robert to manipulate her and was working 2 jobs to pay off the debts he had left behind. I'm learning to be the mother I should have always been, she told me during one of her visits. A year after the ruling, I received a call from Laura, the journalist who had written my original story. Mrs. Morales, would you be interested in writing a book about your experience? We have received hundreds of letters from people who want to know more details of your story, and I believe it could help many other people in similar situations. The idea intrigued me. For months, older people had been contacting me to ask for advice on how to protect themselves from family abuse. I started writing my memoirs that same month. Every day after Chloe left for school, I sat at my new desk and recalled every detail of my experience. Writing was cathartic, but also painful. Reliving the betrayal, the fear, and the sense of powerlessness wasn't easy, but also remembering my strength, my determination, and my eventual victory filled me with pride. The book was published 2 years later with the title I'm Not Crazy, the story of a grandmother who refused to be a victim. It became an immediate success, not only because the story was dramatic, but because it resonated with thousands of older people who had faced similar situations. I began receiving invitations to speak at conferences, community centers, and universities about the rights of older people. During one of my talks, an 80-year-old woman approached me with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Morales, she told me, after hearing your story, I found the courage to confront my son about the money he has been taking from my bank account without permission. Your story saved me. Moments like that reminded me why it had been important to fight. Not just for myself, but for all older people who deserve to age with dignity and respect. Chloe graduated from high school with honors and received a full scholarship to study law at the state university. She told me the night before she left for college, I want you to know that you taught me what it means to be strong, not the kind of strength that yells and threatens, but the kind of strength that stands firm in the truth, no matter how many people try to convince you that you are wrong. Her words filled me with a pride I hadn't felt in years. Today, 3 years after my nighttime escape, I live a full and independent life. I'm 73 years old, I manage my own money, I make my own decisions, and no one tells me what to do or where to live. My garden is flourishing, my house is full of life and laughter when Chloe comes to visit during the holidays, and I have a network of friends and supporters that stretches across the country. Sarah and I have rebuilt a careful but genuine relationship. She will never be the daughter she was before. Robert poisoned her against me, but she has become a woman who recognizes her mistakes and works every day to be better. Mom, she told me during her last visit, I know I can never fully repair the damage I did to you, but I want you to know that I admire the strong woman you always were and that I had to hurt you to be able to see her clearly. Robert is serving his sentence in a state prison, and according to Chloe, who maintains minimal contact with him, he has shown no real remorse for his actions. He still blames me for destroying his family and maintains that he was only trying to care for me. Eleanor had moved to another state after the trial, and I haven't heard anything else from her, which is exactly how I prefer it to be. Every morning when I wake up in my own house, in my own bed, and see the sun coming through the windows I chose, I remember that night when I escaped through the window with only a suitcase and a heart full of determination. That night changed my life, not because I escaped my captors, but because I remembered who I really was, and Rose Morales, a 70-year-old woman who had survived wars, poverty, losses, and betrayals, and who wasn't going to let anyone steal her dignity. The story that began with a whispered phone conversation in the dark ended with an older woman who recovered not only her freedom but also her voice, and that voice is now used to protect others, to educate about elder abuse, and to remind the world that age does not make us victims unless we allow it. I never went back to that house where they treated me like a prisoner. I will never again allow anyone to make me feel like a burden, and I will never again keep silent when I see injustice, regardless of my age or the circumstances, because I learned that real strength doesn't come from young muscles or endless energy, but from accumulated wisdom and the refusal to surrender to adversity. That night, when I climbed out the window toward freedom, I didn't know I was writing the first chapter of the bravest part of my life. Now, every day is a new page in that story of resistance, dignity, and the beautiful truth that it is never too late to fight for what is right. 5 years have passed since that dawn when fear woke me up and courage led me to walk toward freedom. I write these final lines at my desk, the same one where every morning I read the letters that arrive from women across the continent, telling me their own stories of resistance. Some have managed to escape situations similar to mine, others are still fighting, but all have found a spark of hope in my experience that tells them it is possible to win. Chloe graduated as a lawyer last month. I watched her walk across that stage in her gown and cap, and I felt my heart swell with pride. During her speech as the top student in her class, she spoke about justice not as an abstract concept, but as something personal and urgent. My grandmother taught me that the truth always finds its way, she said, looking at me from the podium, but only if we have the courage to open the door for it. She now works at a firm specializing in elder rights, and she tells me that every case reminds her why she chose this profession. The foundation I created with the profits from my book has helped over 300 families resolve conflicts related to elder abuse. We not only provide free legal assistance, but also preventative education and support groups. Every month, I meet with a group of survivors at the community center, and I hear stories that remind me that my experience was not unique, but my response to it was. Sarah comes over for lunch every Sunday. We have developed a new relationship built on painful but necessary honesty. She is no longer my little girl who needs protection, but an adult woman who must bear the consequences of terrible decisions. But she is also a mother who is raising her new baby, my grandson Leo, with different values. I want him to grow up knowing his strong grandmother, she told me, as the little one played in my garden last week. Robert will be released from prison next year. Chloe asked me if I'm afraid he will try to seek revenge, but the truth is he no longer provokes any strong emotion in me. He is simply a man who made wrong choices and is now living with the consequences. His power over me died that night when I decided my freedom was worth more than my comfort. My house has become a refuge not only for me, but for other older women who need a safe place while they resolve their legal situations. The guest room is always occupied by a grandmother who is learning to regain her voice. Mrs. Davis, who is now 82, says my house feels like a sanctuary where women come to remember their own strength. The garden I planted that first year has spread across the entire backyard. Every spring, I plant new varieties of flowers and vegetables because I discovered that creating new life is the best medicine against bitter memories. The roses I planted in memory of my husband are now a gigantic bush that perfumes the entire house, reminding me that true love never dies. It only transforms. Yesterday, I received a letter from a woman in Texas whose son was trying to sell her house without her consent. She wrote to me that after reading my book, she confronted her family and sought legal help. You taught me that being old doesn't mean being helpless, her letter concluded. Thank you for showing me that it is never too late to fight. These letters are my greatest treasure, more valuable than all the savings I protected from Mr. Robert, because they confirmed to me that on that night when I climbed out the window, I not only escaped toward my own freedom, but opened a path for other women to follow. I'm 75 years old now. My hair is completely white, my hands show the lines of time, and my steps are a little slower, but my mind is clear, My will is strong, and my voice is louder than ever. Every morning, I wake up grateful for another day of freedom, another day of dignity, another day of decisions that are only mine. Sometimes in the quiet nights, I remember those months when I lived as a prisoner in my own daughter's house. I remember the feeling of powerlessness, the humiliation of being treated like an object, the pain of family betrayal. But those memories no longer hurt me. They strengthen me. They remind me where I come from and how much I have grown. Life taught me that true victory is not about taking revenge on those who hurt us, but about reclaiming the power we thought we had lost. My revenge against one Robert wasn't sending him to prison. It was proving that his attempts to break me only made me stronger. Tonight, like every night for the past 5 years, I will lock my house with my own keys. I will turn off the lights when I decide, and I will lie down in my own bed, knowing that tomorrow I will wake up free. And that freedom, earned with tears, sweat, and unyielding determination, is the sweetest thing I have tasted in my 75 years of life. It is never too late to write a new chapter. It is never too late to say no more. And it is definitely never too late to discover that within every seemingly frail grandmother lives a warrior who is just waiting for the right moment to awaken. The names and places in this story have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. We do not share this to judge, but in the hope that someone will pause and reflect on how many mothers are silently suffering within their own homes. I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to preserve peace, or would you dare to confront everything in order to reclaim your voice? I long to hear your thoughts because every story is like a candle that can light the path for someone else. I firmly believe that God always blesses, and that courage leads us toward brighter days. As we close, I leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm certain they will surprise and inspire you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.